Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to another day of Kaladesh preview cards. And let me tell you, the hits keep on coming. I mean, this all started a couple weekends ago out at PAX. They started showing some amazing cards, the amazing mechanics of this set. We saw incredible Planeswalkers last week. Today we have another Planeswalker to look at, as a matter of fact, and he's quite good. More on that a little bit later. Yesterday, as we moved into the second week of spoilers, they dropped a huge bomb on us, showing all the inventions in the set. Now, if for some reason you didn't catch the news yesterday, you can check out our videos from yesterday, or else check out the Magic the Gathering Mothership website. But inventions are going to basically be Kaladesh's version of expeditions, and this time around, instead of lands, they're all going to be artifacts. These are some of the most beautiful Magic cards I've ever seen. The art is incredible, the card frame is incredible. They are going to look amazing in foil in person. I can't wait to see one. Just really knocked it out of the park with this. And they also made the announcement yesterday that this type of subset is going to occur in all future standard releases. Collectively, they're going to be known as masterpieces. So expeditions, as well as the inventions, and whatever comes in the future, they're all going to be masterpieces. Huge news for the second week of spoilers. Really took me by surprise. Today, we have 20 more cards to look at. And like I said, we got some good ones in here, including the fourth and final Planeswalker. So before we get started, just a quick reminder, check out the description below for a link to our Amazon affiliate store. And if you make any purchases through any of those links in that store, we'll get a small percentage back to help support the channel. So thank you in advance to everyone who's already made purchases and to anyone who's considering it. And as always, thank you to the patrons on Patreon to help make these videos possible. Having said that, let's get into the cards, and we're going to start off by looking at a total of 8 cards that are actually from the Chandra and the Nissa Planeswalker decks. Now, just before we get started looking at those cards, just a quick point. These next 8 cards are not available in the Kaladesh set. However, they are all going to be standard legal, and they will be unique to the Planeswalker decks. The first 4 will be found in the Chandra deck, and the last 4 will be found in the Nissa deck. So first we have Flame Lash. This costs a red and 3. It's an instant common, deals 4 damage to target creature or player. This has been reprinted a number of times. I think most recently in Conspiracy Take the Crown, I want to say, if I'm correct about that. It just looks familiar. I do really like the art on this version of it. They did a good job. And that's what's cool about this product, I think. The Chandra deck, for example, it's great for new players. I think that's really what it's geared for. These cards aren't cards you really want to try to stick in your standard deck. I mean, obviously, Flame Lash is a good example of that. It's fine in this format if you're playing this Planeswalker deck versus the Nissa deck. It's actually probably nice removal for you, but it's not going to do a whole lot more than that. But I think what's unique, though, about this product is if I'm a real big fan of, say, Chandra, maybe I want to have a Chandra Commander deck or something, not only is there a unique Chandra Planeswalker that we saw last week, but there's also cards that go along with that particular Planeswalker, go along with Chandra Planeswalkers in general, or just simply have new art with Chandra on it. So I think you put that together, it makes a really unique package, and it brings something more to the table than the intro decks did, which I think is pretty interesting. So like I said about this card, yeah, it's nothing you necessarily want to play in standard, but I'm sure it'll be very serviceable if you're playing the 2 decks together. Liberating Combustion, 1 red and 4. This is a rare sorcery. It deals 6 damage to target creature. You may search your library and or graveyard for a card named Chandra Pyrogenius. Reveal it, put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. Again, incredible art. I mean, the card looks really nice. And again, it's not a card that's really at standard power level or anything. But again, it's going to be strong, I think, in that deck. I mean, it will let you just go ahead and take out one of your opponent's creatures, and you get to tutor for your Chandra Pyrogenius. Now, keep in mind, it is specifically Chandra Pyrogenius. So if you play this in Commander, for example, you can't get any Chandra. It has to be that one. Another thing to note, though, if it's in your graveyard and you pull it out of there, you don't have to shuffle your library the way this card is worded. So for some reason, if you don't want to shuffle your library, you don't have to when you play this card if you're pulling the Chandra Pyrogenius out of the graveyard. Renegade Firebrand, 1 red and 2, human warrior, 3/2, uncommon. As long as you control a Chandra Planeswalker, Renegade Firebrand gets +1/+0 and has first strike. So again, if you have that card in play, a nice little beater. I mean, 4/2 first strike for 3, that seems like it'll be pretty strong within that environment of that deck. And If you don't, I mean, 3-2 for 3 is probably still going to be good enough. It's another card that doesn't feel like you're going to want to play it really anywhere else, probably, other than that dual deck, but I think will be serviceable there. And finally, we have one more reprint, Stone Quarry. This is a land, common, enters the battlefield tapped, and of course, then you can tap it for red or white. This is from Shadows over Innistrad. So we haven't seen any of the white cards yet in this Planeswalker deck, so it'll be interesting to see what white contributes to it. All right, let's move on to the 4 Nissa cards. Guardian of the Great Conduit, 1 green and 3, elemental uncommon. It has reach, it's a 2/4, and as long as you control a Nissa Planeswalker, Guardian of the Great Conduit gets +2/+0 and has a vigilance. So this is kind of an interesting one. I mean, it's a giant spider, but if you have Nissa, or a Nissa in play, I should say, you get yourself a +2/+0 and vigilance, so it becomes a 4/4 vigilance reach creature. That's actually a pretty nice beater as well. So yeah, this could be one of the key cards in that deck. Terrain Elemental, 1 green and 1 for a 3/2 vanilla elemental at common. And green does this sometimes, and we get a little extra value on the power level. And yeah, this card's one of those cards. 3/2 for 2, not too much else to say about it. Again, nice little beater in that deck. Verdant Crescendo, 1 green and 3. It's a rare sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Search your library and graveyard for a card named Nissa, Nature's Artisan. Reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So what I do like about these tutor cards is they do something else too. So if you do have, say, Nissa in your hand or in play, then it's just not a dead card. I mean, you still get to ramp a little bit. I mean, it's a little expensive, right, for 4 to ramp, but at least it does something. I mean, the Chandra card still does 6 damage to a creature, so I think they're pretty well designed. And hey, when you're in that matchup and you're playing those 2 decks against each other, part of the fun is playing with the Planeswalkers, so these cards are there to help you get to those Planeswalkers a lot easier. And our last card from these decks, Woodland Stream. It's a land, basic, enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for a green or a blue. And again, this is a card from Shadows over Innistrad. So again, we haven't seen blue's contribution to the Nissa deck. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like going forward. Alright, so those are all the Planeswalker deck cards. Now let's get on to the Kaladesh proper cards. The first card comes to us from a Chinese simplified language spoiler, and loosely translated, it's Consul's Power. Costs 1 white, it's an enchantment. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. So in limited, white definitely has an aggressive strategy. There's a lot of small creatures that can attack in, and if you play it in conjunction with red, there's a lot of options for some aggressive plays. This card is going to help support that aggressive gameplay. So I go in and I want to put down maybe a good 2-drop that's fast and small, maybe a 3-drop that's another fast and small creature that can just get across for a lot of damage quickly, and this will help me keep getting that damage across for a longer period of time. When my opponent plays a card or plays a creature, it's going to come into play tapped. I get another chance to attack in before that thing gets a chance to block. That's going to be huge for an aggressive build, because a lot of times aggressive builds just kind of start off strong and then run out of gas. This is going to help you stay competitive a little bit longer. So you're doing damage for longer, and also you're gaining a little bit of life, which is nice if your opponent's also playing an aggressive build. This is going to allow you to win some races and squeak out some victories. Also, control decks would like a card like this. Control decks are all about slowing down the game. This card does slow your opponent down. It's also worthy to note that this effect hits all opponents for multiplayer games such as Commander. So I guess the question is something like this viable in Standard? It just depends on the meta, quite honestly. I mean, control decks are pretty popular right now, but the first question is, A, do they even need this, or are there other threats they can use out there? Aggressive decks, I think, would be the ones that would want to use this more in Standard, but again, we'd have to wait and see what the rest of the set looks like to see if there's potentially a maybe Boros aggressive deck, for example, out there. If there is, this could be a card that is brought in out of the sideboard for mirror matchups. I think that would be what you could possibly expect anyway from Standard if it could get there. But regardless, I still think it's a decent limited card. I mean, it's not for every limited build. Obviously, if you're playing a more mid-range deck or something, you probably don't want this. But certain strategies, this is pretty cool. Next, we have Inspired Charge. 2 white and 2. This is an instant common. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. And this is a reprint as well. This has actually been printed a couple times. I believe the first time was Magic 2011. And this is, again, a good card for an aggressive deck that's trying to go wide. So we know white has a lot of small aggressive creatures. They also have Fabricate as one of their main mechanics. They're also using vehicles. this works well with all of those strategies, right? So you're trying to go wide, maybe put some of your tokens into vehicles, just do one big attack, play this at instant speed. It's a huge combat trick, and a lot of times can put away a game. Very, very strong card in limited. A lot of times I like to have a couple of these in my deck if I have a really strong go wide strategy, and just put away a game by playing 2 of them once I get to the point where I have 8 mana. This can be very, very good in those situations. It could also be standard playable, again, if a hyper aggressive go wide deck exists. If it can break into the metagame, this could be a card to support it. Next we have Padim, Consul of Innovation. 1 blue and 3, legendary, Modelica Artificer. It's a rare, 1/4. Artifacts you control have hexproof. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost, or tied for the highest, you draw a card. Now, that's actually kind of awesome, right? All your artifacts are hexproof. So first off, in limited, there's tons of great artifacts in this set. If you're lucky enough to open one of these cards, you play this, it protects your artifacts, and this is kind of hard to deal with. I mean, a 1/4, it's not fragile. It's quite a bit of toughness. So I think it's a she's pretty tough. I mean, she's going to protect your stuff, and she's going to be difficult at times to get rid of. Now, as far as the card draw effect goes, especially in limited, there's going to be a level of variance there. I mean, there's going to be times your opponent's going to have a larger artifact than you are, and you might not always get that card draw. If you get the card draw, though, and you get rolling with that, you're just going to take over the game. And if you don't, it's okay. Your artifacts still have hexproof. That's still pretty awesome for 4 mana. So this is a bomb in limited. I think this will really shine in Commander because first off, it is legendary. This could be a Commander, so that's worthy to note. And if you have a artifact-centric Commander deck where you play a creature like this and just defend all of your artifacts, that's a pretty big deal. And in Commander, it's a little easier too to try to be in a situation where you have the largest artifact on the board, considering you can ramp your mana a little bit, and then you'll be getting the additional card draws and everything like that. Could this see standard play? I think it's possible. It just depends on what all the artifacts in this set really kind of pan out to be. If there's some strong ones out there, or maybe some really good artifact creatures, it could certainly see play there. I mean, we already have seen the Gear Hulks. I mean, maybe there's a deck that just curves from this into a Gear Hulk, and that's just good enough. That would just be more of a mid-range deck, probably. And if it did make it into the meta, I mean, you'd have to kind of measure that up against how good the aggro decks and the control decks are at the time. But if it does make it there, then this card would be a part of that deck. So it could potentially see some standard play. I think we'll know more again on Friday once we see the full set and what everything looks like. But aside from that, though, awesome Commander card. This could be another good cube card, too, if you have an artifact theme in your cube, and definitely a limited bomb. Next we have Aetherborn Marauder. It costs a black and 3. It's an Aetherborn Rogue, 2/2, flying lifelink. This is uncommon. And when this enters the battlefield, move any number of +1/+1 counters from other permanents you control onto Aetherborn Marauder. Now the thing with this card is it's very situational in the fact that when you play this, you may or may not have +1/+1 counters on creatures, and quite honestly, probably most of the time you're not going to want to move those counters onto one creature. Most of the time, under normal circumstances in a vacuum, it's better to spread your power and toughness out so that if there's spot removal or something like that, you're not losing as much board presence. Now, if you start moving counters onto this one creature and they have a removal spell, it's not going to feel real good. There are situations where it might make sense. For example, you have some small creatures with 1/1 counters and the battlefield's just all gummed up and they can't get across. So moving those counters onto a creature with evasion and with flying and lifelink actually may make sense. Or maybe you have a creature with counters that is under a pacifism style effect or something like that. So there are times that will work, but truly to evaluate this card, you're going to want to think to yourself, is this worth playing if I don't have any +1/+1 counters that I want to move onto this creature? And I think the answer is maybe in limited. You're still getting a 2/2 flyer with lifelink for 4 is not the worst thing in the world. It actually could be good in some limited decks, especially if you're looking for something at the 4-drop spot. It's definitely playable, but there's going to be other times you just have better 4-drops in your pool and you probably won't play this. So I think that's the way you got to look at this card. It's there if you need it in limited. That's probably about it. Malthus Squad. This one costs a black and 3, Human Artificer. It's a common. 3/1 with Menace and Fabricate 1. Yet again, another pretty good limited card. I mean, I like paying 4 for 3/1 Menace plus the Fabricate, so this could potentially be a 4/2, or else it will still be a 3/1 with a 1/1 creature token if that benefits you more at the given board state. I like it a lot, actually. Again, it's not a card that I think would cross over in a standard or anything like that, because for 4 mana, you kind of wanted to do something a little bit more than it's doing to get into constructed, but I think it's a very good beater in limited. Next card is Adventurer's Apprentice. Costs a red. It's a human artificer, uncommon 1/2. And this will get +1/+1 as long as you control an artifact. So it kind of feels like Curd Ape in a way, doesn't it? Instead of a forest, you have to have an artifact. But there's a lot of cheap artifacts out there. As a matter of fact, if you're super lucky, maybe you open something like, oh, I don't know, a Chrome Mox or something, and you get to play that with this in limited. But in the real world, I mean, there's still some good one-drop artifacts and stuff like that that we have already seen previewed. So there's a lot of stuff that can enable this. I'm sure there's a lot more stuff coming too over the next couple days. So this seems to work really well with the aggressive red cards and maybe some of the Boros cards. For example, there's that other card in white that if you have an artifact, you basically got a 3/2 for 1. This kind of complements that card pretty well. So imagine a deck with some cheap equipment that can enable cards like the white card as well as this one to just attack in early and then attack in with equipment attached to them later for even more damage. Yeah, I think this is potentially standard playable as long as that aggro deck can get there in the meta. And it's also another very good limited card. It's good at the beginning of the game, and if you have some equipment, it will be good in the mid to late game as well, potentially. Very good card in both those cases. Next we have Ruinous Gremlin. It costs a red. It's a gremlin, common 1/1. And you can pay a red to sacrifice it and destroy target artifact. So I was kind of expecting or maybe hoping for a shatter effect at common. This feels a little expensive for me though, but maybe it makes sense. Perhaps something like shatter at common would be too cheap, considering there's some really good targets for artifact destruction in this set, right? So this is going to cost you basically 4 and the ability to sacrifice this creature to destroy an artifact. Now, there are great targets out there, so this is still very limited playable, even though it costs a little more than maybe I would have liked. But I mean, imagine taking out like a Gear Hulk with this thing, right? Just crazy value in a situation like that. Now, Shatter maybe would have been too good. Maybe it would have been too easy to really build up to a big threat just to have it shattered out of nowhere. And maybe we'll still see it at uncommon or something like that, but at least at common, it looks like this is going to be Red's go-to answer for artifact removal. Not super exciting, but it's going to get the job done, so you'll be happy to play it. And quite honestly, this thing will probably do a lot of work just in the limited environment in general. Salivating Gremlins. 1 red and 2. It's a gremlin, common 2/3, and when an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+0 and gains trample till end of turn. This plays really well with the Fabricate cards. A lot of them that are like Fabricate 2 or 3 allow you to put multiple artifact creatures in play at the same time. That will pump this up significantly, and even if it dies and takes 3 damage in the process, you might get huge amounts of damage across in the meantime, especially if you're running a couple of these in your deck. It is at common, so there'll be plenty of these going around in the draft. I do like this as a fantastic limited beater and an aggressive build that's playing with a lot of the Fabricate cards. And even if you don't have a lot of Fabricate in your build, Fabricate in conjunction with just some cheap artifacts will still allow you to get some value out of this. And overall, I mean, you're still getting a 2/3 for 3 if nothing else. It's still very serviceable and limited. Could this potentially cross over into standard? It has a chance, I think. It just depends again on what the Fabricate cards are going to look like as a whole, especially in red and colors that work well with red, perhaps the Boros colors. If they're good enough, this could get there, so keep an eye on it. And perhaps maybe it's in the future, like post the next rotation or something like that, but I do feel like eventually we're going to see some sort of Boros aggro deck. The pieces seem to be kind of falling in place. I don't know if they're all there yet, and we probably won't know until we see the full set spoiled, but it feels like there's a possibility for sure. Next we have our Planeswalker of the day. It's Dovin Baan, 1 blue, 1 white, and 2, of course, mythic rare, 3 loyalty. +1 until your next turn. Up to one target creature gets -3, 0, and its activated abilities can't be activated. -1, you gain 2 life and draw a card. -7, you get an emblem with your opponents can't untap more than 2 permanents during their untap steps. So that goes for all opponents, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, this is a pretty awesome card, actually. I'm very excited about this. Great control planeswalker for standard. I think this is what this card's trying to do. Now, when you start looking beyond standard into like modern, legacy, stuff like that, this card is competing with some great control planeswalkers, cards like Jace Beleren, Jace the Mind Sculptor, stuff like that. So I don't know if it's really going to shine in those places as much as it could in standard. But right now, hey, look at the meta in standard. I mean, there's a very strong control element that goes through a number of different decks. This will complement some of those decks, especially as Bant Company starts to maybe change into a more control style deck with creatures. This could definitely be a part of it as the metagame evolves. I love the fact that he can defend himself with his first ability. Taking 3 power off a creature is pretty significant, but also the fact it can nullify activated abilities. You don't see that a lot of times, so that actually could be very helpful in not only protecting himself, but just slowing your opponent down from doing what they're trying to do. And the real meat and potatoes of this card is the -1. Drawing cards is huge. Even if you play this guy and you can possibly draw 2 cards and then maybe you try to +1 him once or twice and you draw 2 more cards, that's huge value over a period of time. As far as the ultimate goes, it's not irrelevant either, especially in a control matchup. You could slow the game down to the point where you could get to ultimate this card, and let's face it, we've seen a lot of planeswalkers being ultimated in standard recently because of the control elements that are there. I mean, look at Liliana the Last Hope, for example. It feels like every time you turn on a stream, you see 1,000 zombies on the battlefield, right? So this card definitely has a chance to get there. I think it's going to see a lot of standard play, and if you happen to open this in limited, sure, of course, it's going to be a bomb there too. Another card that's going to be great in cubes as well as commander because, hey, it's a planeswalker, and they're fun to play in those formats. Next we have Whirler Virtuoso. It's a red, a blue, and 1. It's a Vedalken Artificer, uncommon, and when it enters the battlefield you get 3 energy counters. You can pay 3 energy to create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, and it's a 2/3. So for the last week and a half, you've probably heard me say, you know, I'm just looking for that payoff for my energy. I got all these ways to get all this great energy, but what am I really doing with it? Well, here's something that you can do with it that's very good. Making 1/1 flyers with your energy, that's the real deal, folks. That's the type of thing that wins games. All you have to do is have a situation where you can get yourself some energy, whether that's through cards that are giving you energy as they enter the battlefield, maybe flickering some of those cards, what have you. As long as you have a steady stream of energy that your deck can provide for you, you're going to run away with cards like this on the battlefield. Now, having said that, here's the deal. In Limited, great card. It's an uncommon. Hopefully, if you're lucky, you'll be able to pick up a couple of these in your deck and just draft around it. Try to draft as much energy generating cards as you possibly can and just turn that energy into flyers. That'll become crazy quickly in the right deck. Maybe a little bit better in draft where you can orchestrate that a little more than sealed, but still could be very, very good. Could this cross over into standard? Here's the missing piece we need to see. We really need to see the rest of the set because there are a lot of good ways to generate energy. What we have to figure out is there a deck there? In other words, is there a deck that can cast this for Izzet colors, but yet can still comfortably cast the other good cards that give you energy? Because some of them are in black or even green, right? So can you make that mana base work? If you can, yes, this could potentially see some standard play. We're just going to have to see how deep that deck is going to need to go to be good. So once Friday rolls around, we'll probably have a better idea once we see the full set, especially the commons and uncommons. That'll make a big difference with a card like this. So potentially this might be your payoff for energy, or at least one of them. Stay tuned. We'll know more later in the week, but I think this is a real good card, and regardless, still a real nice limited card, especially with the energy to back it up. Next we have Bomat Courier. Cost 1, artifact creature construct. It's a rare with haste, 1/1. When this attacks, exile the top card of your library face down. You can't look at it. Pay 1 red, discard your hand, sacrifice this, put all cards exiled with this into their owner's hand. Okay, this one's kind of an enigma to me. Like, I look at it and I'm like, this feels like it could be really good, but how do you ensure that you're going to make it work for yourself? I do like the fact that it's a 1-drop with haste. Like, you don't see that very often. That's pretty cool. Not only do you get a point of damage across, and maybe if you're lucky, you get a couple points of damage across over the first few turns. And then you have a couple cards that are just in backup that if you need them later, you might be able to pull to your hand. But what's a little awkward about this is you need to have one of these in play to sacrifice it to get that to happen. So if something happens to this creature too soon, you don't want to ditch 5 cards for 2, right? That could be awkward. Or if you don't have the red mana up and something happens to the creature, that could be a bad situation and you just don't get the value out of it. So there's a lot of things that could go wrong with this card. I mean, it is worthy to note that if you're running multiples of these, then you could play a different one and get those cards out of exile back to your hand that way. But at the same time, it feels very precarious. Like, a lot of things could go wrong with this card, and you got to kind of wonder if the payoff is high enough. It feels like it could be good under certain situations. Now, I think this card could shine with some equipment. So you play this on turn 1, maybe you get an attack or 2 out of it. In the meantime, you get your equipment out, equip this thing up. Now maybe it becomes a 3-3 or a 3-4 or something. Now it's a lot harder to kill. It can keep attacking in, even if it's getting blocked and you're just not getting damage across. You're still getting more cards piled up that you could potentially draw, quote-unquote, later. That's actually pretty good, right? So let's look at that from a limited point of view. I think this could be really, really good in limited if you play it the right way. It's rare, so you're going to be lucky to get one of these, but if you have some good equipment to back it up, this could be a good card. It can help you get some card advantage later in the game, and it could be quite strong for you. Standard, it could be quite strong, but I feel like you might have to jump through too many hoops to make it happen. All those issues I mentioned earlier, the fact that you definitely need to increase its power and toughness with equipment or something like that. You're going to need to hopefully draw it early to get some early access to attacking with it. You're going to need to have red mana available. You're going to need to have one of these creatures available to sacrifice. There starts to become too much variance for me to feel super comfortable trying to play this in standard. Even in a control build or even in an aggressive build, I feel like there's a lot that could go wrong with this card. It feels like it wants to be in that aggressive deck, and maybe it would be fine there, but I also feel like there's also some super aggressive 1-drops that could be good as well. For example, we saw the card yesterday that costs 1 white, and if you have an artifact in play, you can attack it on turn 2 with the 3/2. Is that just better than something like this? That's what I kind of have to ask myself. So I don't know. Again, we haven't seen the full set, so I won't count it out yet, but at the very least, I think it is a very good limited card as long as you have the equipment to back it up. Alright, the last card of the day is Scrap Heap Scrounger. This one costs 2, and it's an artifact creature construct, rare, 3/2, and this can't block. But you can pay a black and 1, exile another creature card from your graveyard, and return this from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a nice aggressive card. I mean, it costs 2 for a 3/2. Granted, it can't block, but that's okay. This thing doesn't want to block. This wants to be in a hyper aggressive deck where you just keep attacking in. And later on, when it does die, you're able to perhaps maybe trade it with a creature. Your opponent has to start blocking it at some point. They're just taking too much damage. And then later on, you get to bring it back and do it again. Now, as the game goes on, unfortunately, a 3/2 becomes less and less good. So by the time you're able to bring it back, it might not be super awesome for you anymore, as opposed to how good it was on turn 2 or turn 3, right? But at the same time, it's still an aggressive creature that's going to keep coming back. And you know what? Even if I'm not running black, and I'm just getting myself a 3/2 for 2, that might be just good enough a lot of times, especially in limited. If I have a beatdown plan, maybe I'm in Boros colors and I have a lot of great beatdown cards, this is another one for 2 mana, and if I have black to bring it back, wonderful. If I don't, that's fine too. I have other cards I'm going to use. So yeah, this potentially could see some play in standard as well, again, if those aggressive decks can break through, and whether that be a deck that's running black or not. Of course, this is probably better in a deck that can run black, and of course standard, you have a better mana base, you might be able to swing it a little easier. So yeah, potentially, again, if there is an aggressive deck in the meta, yeah, we might be able to see it there. Having said that, those are the cards for today. So still getting great cards. I mean, this set is blowing me away. I'm very excited. We have another couple days of spoiler videos, so we'll be back tomorrow and Thursday with more spoilers. Friday we'll begin the full set review, starting off by looking at all of the white cards in the set, and then we'll work our way through the color pie. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.